Hello, I'm making this video because I need to expose a massive security breach that the Dutch government have been covering up since June 2011. I've already exhausted all normal methods to get this matter exposed, but I'm being blocked at every possible opportunity. So, who am I? Well, my name's Gary Quinn. I'm a hippie war protester who left the UK as a protest against the actions of Prime Minister Tony Blair. We believe the man is responsible for many war crimes, and he's never prosecuted. So, as a non-violent war protest, I left the UK and came to live in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, I got a job working for the military-industrial complex, which is probably not the best sort of job for a hippie to get. However, I now have information that I feel compelled to share, so during this presentation I shall show you some documents. The documents are my personal property. They do not belong to the government. They were either sent by me or addressed to me. They are my property, and I choose to share them. I am an IT worker. I took a job working for a company called Bizarre Networks. They control the satellite communications of some of the world's most important organisations, most of whom are publicly funded with our taxes. These organisations would include the United Nations Development Programme, the World Health Organization, the European Commission, the British Army and the American Army for all their off-duty calls for their soldiers to call home from Iraq and Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Bizarre Networks had effectively no security in place and no data protection. In fact, the management had never heard of data protection, which is outrageous. While working as a satellite communications operator, one of my colleagues accidentally left a laptop computer in a train station. We all had these laptops that can control all of the aforementioned networks. I mean, absolute control. We run the network. We can steal any amount of data. We can change flows of traffic. We can do whatever. So these laptops really should have been kept secure, but the management insisted that the staff can take them home, take them out with them, take them to their friends' houses, to their girlfriends, whatever. And as I say, these laptops can not only access but can control some of the most important communication networks in the world with no security. What I mean by no security is there was no sort of background checks done on any of the staff. In theory, they should have been checked in a deep background check. The homes should have been inspected. The people they live or share the house with should have been investigated. All sorts of things should have been done, but absolutely nothing was done. But this is Holland, so as a result, when a breach of this nature occurs and the laptop was lost, we should in theory notify all the affected parties. We should contact every one of those organisations, United Nations, European Commission, the armies, everyone. But the management decided that would be a bad idea and best just not to tell anyone. There's a laptop in circulation, lost, that can do damage to the world's most important organisations, and the management said, no, we just won't tell anyone. It'll be fine. I did not agree with that logic. I'm a British citizen and I may be a war protester, but I will not look the other way at anything which endangers British service personnel and their families. I simply will not cooperate with that sort of cover-up. I confronted the management of Bizarre Networks and asked them why this was the case, why they wouldn't have normal security. I sent them a itemised letter of my concerns and I received a reply which astonished me. As you'll see in a moment, the management made it absolutely clear they have no interest in the safety of the end users of their service, none whatsoever. So, firstly, I shall show my letter to the company, and then I shall show their reply to me. Yeah. Okay, this is my letter to Bizarre Networks management about the things that are happening at their company. I've just realised that's a bit small if you've got a small television. Hang on, I'll zoom in on the top half of the page where the interesting stuff is. That should be easier to read. You can clearly see I do raise the point that we are working from home with our laptops and using a company mobile telephone as a tethered internet connection, controlling the world's most important computer networks from a laptop at home, connected to a mobile phone for internet. Wow. If I could draw your attention to the last paragraph, I say, My concern is simply that Visada Networks has no knowledge or control over which third parties can see the PC monitor and therefore the client data. I make it very clear that they are not controlling the data in the way they're supposed to. This is government, military, secret data. Ridiculous. Okay, what you can see here is the reply I got from Visada Networks regarding the comments I'd just made previously. The only thing I've crossed out is my address at the top of the page. Everything else is complete as I got it. I'm going to zoom in again as before to make it easier to read. Alright, now I've zoomed in a little bit, you should be able to read this easily. Can I draw your attention to item 3, data protection, and just exactly what Visada Networks had to say with that. They don't dispute that we're working from home. Nothing. My favourite is the last sentence. As such, we have no general responsibility for the content sent by our customers over the network. They're saying they have no responsibility for the end users. The end users are our governments and our military. Is Dutch law really this weak, or is it just this company bluffing? I really don't know. Undeterred by Visada Networks management's attitude of complete disinterest for the safety and security of the users of their servers, I decided to take legal advice and see what I should do. My legal advice was really simple. The lawyer told me, this is a matter of security, report it to the proper authorities immediately. Don't have another argument with the management, just report this to the proper authorities. People's safety is at risk. Don't waste any time, just do it. My passport says I'm still the property of the British government, and I'm still an Englishman. I'll always be an Englishman. So, I felt compelled to contact the British government. I have a colourful 30-year history with the British Home Office, but nevertheless that was put to one side and I did the right thing. Contacted them and informed them of their potential security issues which would affect their soldiers and their soldiers' families. Regardless of our other disputes, we agreed on one thing, that all data relating to their soldiers and their families should be treated as a state secret, and it definitely was not the case. I feel compelled to give credit where credit is due. The British government took decisive action to ensure the future security of their soldiers and their soldiers' families would not again be put in that position by building their own purpose-built satellite communication system for the army. That's much more than I ever expected them to do. I did the right thing by telling them about it, and the British government did the right thing by providing the best possible, most secure communications network for their soldiers to keep in touch with their families. Well done, British government. Part of this too would be the Dutch police. I went to my local police station and I explained the situation, showed various documents just to show that I am legitimate and my allegations are in fact true. The police said it was a strange situation because it involves foreign governments and the military, and I should really talk to the Dutch Data Protection Authority because they specialise in this sort of situation. I appreciate the police had no other option, their hands are tied, they can't investigate military issues at all, so the police really couldn't do anything apart from refer me. And I'm grateful, they were quite nice about everything. So, taking the advice given to me by the Dutch police, I contacted the Dutch Data Protection Authority. I explained generally what had been happening, what the security breach meant, and the fact that it was being covered up. They explained to me this was a serious issue and they would require to make 2 separate cases. One case would be for all of the non-military organisations, that would be handled by Dutch Data Protection Authority. The other case would all be military organisations, and that must be handled by Dutch military intelligence, because Dutch military intelligence arranged all of these contracts, pre-approved these contracts. That fact becomes important later. I did contact Dutch military intelligence and I told them what had happened. They were absolutely furious to discover that, well, it had been covered up by the management of Visada Networks. But then what happened next astonished me. Within one conversation it became apparent that Dutch military intelligence intended to cover this whole thing up and it would be dealt with internally. That sounded suspicious, particularly as they had pre-arranged all of these contracts in the first place, that they're going to investigate it internally. That definitely didn't sound right. It sounded like, well, like they just joined in the cover-up. A few days after talking to Dutch military intelligence, I called the Dutch Data Protection Authority about the non-military organisations. They informed me that Dutch military intelligence had now taken control of both cases and they are not allowed to answer any of my questions. They just referred me to I must speak to Dutch military intelligence. Bear in mind that just a few days before they agreed there was a problem and they'd actually made a case for the non-military organisations, a case which has now been taken over by Dutch military intelligence, non-military organisations. The plot thickens, the cover-up just gets worse. As it was so obvious that Dutch military intelligence intended to cover up everything that had happened, I needed to report them. But who do you report them to? One of the few people with more authority than them is the Prime Minister, Prime Minister Rutte. So I wrote directly to Prime Minister Rutte and informed him exactly what's been going on. Please see my letter. Here it is. Alright, well, here is the full letter. The only part I've crossed out at the top is my address. Again, it's slightly difficult to read because it's a bit small, so I shall zoom in on the top half of the letter. You have to pause it if you want to read this bit. And now I shall zoom in on the bottom half of the letter. Again, you can just pause and read the bottom half of the letter. After a 4-month delay, I did receive a reply to my letter to Mr. Rutte, not from the Prime Minister, from the Minister of Defence. He basically said it had been investigated internally and there was nothing to worry about. Even the Minister of Defence is now joining in the cover-up. This was a massive security breach. Dutch military intelligence had approved a company with no security for top security contracts. There'd been no security in place on any of the calls home from Iraq and Afghanistan for the British and American armies for more than 5 years. No data protection in place for all those service personnel and their families. This is what they're covering up. This is why it was investigated internally. This is why the Dutch Data Protection Authority were not allowed to proceed with their proper investigation. This corruption goes all the way to the very top. Alright, here's the letter I received from the Dutch Minister of Defence in reply to my letter to Prime Minister Rutte. The only part I've crossed out at the top is my address. Again, it's a little bit difficult to read, so I'm going to zoom in on the text part and we'll take a good look at that. Firstly, I'd like you to notice that the Dutch Minister of Defence completely neglects to mention the European Commission, the United Nations Development Programme, the World Health Organization, or any of the non-military organisations his department took control of. Not mentioned at all. And with regard to the military services, he just says operational and non-operational networks. By that he means military operations. So the fact that it's only used for soldiers to call home means it's okay that it had no security in place for 5 years. This is outrageous. They refuse to discuss the non-military and make a pathetic excuse for the military security breach. This was thousands of soldiers talking to their families for years, and this is all the reply I get. Outrageous. All of this made it clear that the Dutch government are okay with the fact that Dutch military intelligence investigate their own incompetence and or corruption in secret and no one else gets to know what happens. That's the way they do business here. But realistically, with such incredibly low standards of data protection in this country, they've got a lot to cover up. I did notice while working at Bizarre Networks that most of the visitors to the office do strange handshake rituals in the hallway with the staff, the senior staff at Bizarre Networks. To me, they look like a bunch of Freemasons. That would actually make sense. The military industrial complex, Freemasons, contracts to the boys, investigations done internally. Yeah, it has the ring of Masonic corruption, doesn't it? Dutch lawyers. That was the next thing I needed. Considering all that had happened, I thought I need to find myself a human rights lawyer, because this is just a massive cover-up at the very highest levels of the Dutch government. That was back in October 2011. It's now October the 5th, 2014. 3 years has passed. In that 3 years, I'm sick of contacting lawyers. No one, not any Dutch lawyer, has ever allowed me to bring the documents into their office. Every possible excuse has been put forward. but they do not want me to bring the evidence of Dutch corruption into their offices. So I'm completely unable to find any lawyer who will even talk to me or look at the evidence. The Dutch legal system does seem to be within the control of the Freemasons. How disappointing. Next thing to try was the media. The media here in the Netherlands, the media back in the UK, and the media in the USA. The media in all three countries will not talk to me. They will not reply to my calls. If I try to send them evidence via email, they block my emails. I suspect, but I have no way to check, some sort of super injunction stops the media from talking to me. Again, if there's nothing to hide, why are they going to such lengths to stop this matter coming out? As I challenged them from the very beginning, if you want to call me a liar, prosecute me. Otherwise, prosecute the guilty and I'll be a witness. Earlier this year, I travelled down to Den Haag, which is where Dutch Parliament is, and I stood outside the Dutch Parliament and handed out the leaflet I'm about to show you, in English and Dutch, to passers-by. The Dutch authorities allowed me to do this. I mean, it doesn't make any difference. The media are not allowed to report it. Please read the handout. If you're affected by this, then we collectively need to do something about it. If you're a soldier in the British and American Army, if your families, if you work for the United Nations Development Programme, or the World Health Organization, or the European Commission, or if you're just a taxpayer who's sick of the tax money going to bogus companies, then we really do need to do something about this. To illustrate the complete waste of taxpayers' money to all of these publicly funded organisations, I've made the following chart. From this chart we can see what was actually happening with all this taxpayers' money. The top half of the chart shows how taxpayers' money should be spent. These publicly funded organisations should try to get a direct supplier for all services. I mean, this is our money that they're spending. But for some reason, if you look at the bottom half of the chart, this is the way it really works. There's at least 4 unnecessary companies in the middle of this flowchart. They're all directly or indirectly receiving money, taxpayers' money. This is not an efficient way to do these things, not at all. This is the first video I've ever made, so I apologise for any poor production quality. I really could use some assistance in getting this information out into the public domain. Feel free to re-upload this information anywhere, social media, torrent sites, whatever. It is important. It did affect a lot of people, and I could really do with some assistance. Thank you. Goodbye.